Today we're going to talk a little bit about motivation and strategies to help cope with apathy. And I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. But before we do that, we'll move slides. And I'd like to introduce myself. I don't like to assume that everybody knows me that's on here. My name is Jessica Thomas. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I am also the facilitator of the MS Views and News mental wellness chat. And I've been doing this since the beginning of the program. I think we're getting closer to 4 years now. And it's incredibly exciting to see the community that we've built. As if you don't know me, I always like to share myself in numbers because I think it makes sense a little bit more. So 20 is the number of years that I've been married. My husband and I celebrated our 20th year anniversary, a wedding anniversary this year. And 19 is the number of years that I've been living with a diagnosis of MS. And so as you can tell, I was a newlywed at my diagnosis. I've been a social worker since 2001, so I've been a social worker for a long time. But for 18 is the number of years that I've been really specializing in helping people that are living with chronic disease. So I've worked a lot with chronic and progressive disease, and my specialty is in neurology, and I'm also have a specialty in oncology. And 17 is the number of years that my son turned this year. So I had my child after my MS diagnosis, and so it just tells you a little bit about me. We'll move slides. And we're going to thank Viatris for their support of this MS Mental Wellness Chat. They have been supporting us for a good bit, and we have been indebted for all that they're doing. I always like to thank MS Views and News too, because this program started as an idea during COVID and has continued and has been a very successful way of helping people to connect. So thank you to both MS Views and News and Viatris. We'll move to our next slide. So I will start off by saying, you are not alone. This is something I mention a lot. And the reason why is because it's the truth. You are not alone in how you're feeling today, this evening, in general. And I think it's important for us to normalize that we are not, that we're not alone, because often that's something that we can feel. We have Summer from Baltimore that joined. Summer, I'm glad that you're on here as well. So we'll move on to our next slide. So we're going to talk about apathy. We're going to talk about motivation, but in order to talk about motivation, we need to talk a little bit about apathy. And part of the reason why I opened this up to potentially to other chronic diseases this evening was just because apathy can tend to be a part of a lot of people's journeys when they're living with different illnesses. And so let's define apathy. Apathy is generally a lack of motivation or interest or enthusiasm or activities that would typically bring you joy or that are meaningful. And it is not uncommon to experience apathy in your life, but we can talk. I want to talk a little bit about some of the causes of apathy. So some causes of apathy are depression, burnout, stress. So you can have psychological reasons or causes. You can also have neurological causes. Brain injuries or even conditions like MS or Parkinson's can lead you to, your disease state can give you apathy sometimes. And there can be environmental causes such as, just like everything kind of having a lot of monotony, like just routines, lack of social interaction. So when you think about the causes, environmental, neurological, then psychological, and the impact of apathy can be pretty big. When you are feeling apathy, you might have reduced productivity, you may have strained relationships, and you may feel a lower quality of life. There may be emotional consequences such as like guilt or frustration for how you're feeling. And signs of apathy. You may have difficulty initiating tasks, feeling detached from kind of your goals, or having a sense of indifference to opportunities. Now, as a social worker, I've worked with different disease states, and I've worked very, very, very closely with MS and Parkinson's disease. And both diseases can, as I said, naturally have apathy sometimes attached to them. Parkinson's especially, and so in the disease state, you would see that sometimes that there was like a lack of getting started, a lack of wanting to do things, and um, and so, and when you look at apathy and depression, I don't want to stay on this point too long, but apathy can happen within depression. You can often you can have depression and have apathy as a part of that, but you could also have apathy and no depression. It can just be apathy in itself. So we're going to move on to our next slide. So I'm going to ask you to be brave. Have you ever experienced apathy? And if so, how did it feel? And did you tell anyone? And I'll tell you my apathy story. So I remember several years ago, my family was going through a closure of a business, and I was going to be going out of private practice. I had been seeing people as a therapist, and so we had these big changes in our life. We decided to close a business, and then because of that, I decided to leave private practice, and I was going to go to just a regular job. And during that time, I experienced a lot of apathy, and it was related to the adjustment of it, and a little bit of probably a little bit of sadness, but I felt very apathetic, just kind of very unmotivated, and it was so frustrating. And so, what did I do? I told my neurologist because I knew that it was not typical with my personality, it was not typical with my actions, and it was not typical. Just for me in general. And I knew that if I didn't attend to it, that I would, it could spiral into not feeling good or even spiral maybe into depression. So that is what I did. Have any of you ever experienced apathy? Where you just feel kind of blah? Or it's hard to get, we have someone I know that's felt blah today, but it's hard to get moving or hard to doing something. I will let you continue to write in. I know I'm not the only one that's ever experienced apathy, but to share your examples if you want. But feeling apathy can be very frustrating, especially if it's something that you have not experienced before. And so when you're living with a chronic disease, or living with just making sure I got a text. I was just making sure it was nothing related to this. Okay, so thank you, Joe. Joe says, I believe I'm dealing with it now. So thank you for sharing that. So when you're feeling those physical changes, or you notice that you're just having a loss of interest in doing things, that you're not getting the same level of joy out of things, that it's hard to do what you normally were able to do, or to find joy, it's important to talk with your doctor or talk to someone about it. So we're going to move on to our next slide. I'm going to leave this open as a conversation. So I talked a couple months ago about types of losses associated with chronic illness, and I'm bringing this up only for a smidge, just to say this, that with chronic illness, with MS, there's physical losses often. They could be losses in physical strength, mobility, sensory function. There can be emotional losses, changes in self-esteem, body image, self-control. There can be social losses, changes in relationships, loss of social connection, career changes. And then future-oriented losses, loss of future plans, dreams, or even like a predictable life path. Although I can argue that sometimes knowing about MS kind of gives that loss, but we all don't know everything about the future. And so just knowing that some of those losses sometimes and some of those changes can lead to feelings of apathy. So we have Helen that says, I have it all the time, and I do have it now too. Thank you for sharing, Helen. And David said when I no longer could walk properly, so due to some changes. So we're gonna also talk about and we have Rhonda says, I feel apathy when I want to participate, but I know my walking prohibits me from participating. So thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable. We're going to talk a little bit about motivation, but if you experience apathy and you want to connect and share, please feel free to share. We're going to move on to our next slide. So we understand apathy a little bit. I want to understand now motivation because the big part of tonight's presentation is that I want you to understand motivation and some strategies so I can help them. And I can tell you that I have a lot of experience working with people that have dealt with apathy, and I have worked a lot with strategies that have been successful for people. But we're all a little bit different. So I want you to think about this as almost like a recipe, kind of finding the recipe, the things that work for you. So to understand motivation, let's talk about there's different types of motivation. There's intrinsic, which is like inside motivation. And this is driven by like internal rewards, like personal satisfaction. And then there's extrinsic, motivation, and that's influenced by external factors such as like rewards or deadlines. I am I'm more apt to be rewarded on the outside than I am for the inside, if that makes sense. I tend to understand my motivation, or I am more motivated that way. So there's barriers to motivation too. So some of the barriers to motivation are, you may feel that you might fail, or having lack of like a clear goal or even sense of purpose can make it hard to feel motivated because it might feel like it's too big or it's too hard to tackle. Also, fatigue and chronic stress are barriers to motivation. I'm just going to open this up here because I would imagine that many people experience this. How many of you experience physical fatigue? And sometimes that's a barrier to being motivated. I will raise my hand and say that does happen to me sometimes, that I have an idea of something I want to do, and my fatigue kind of wins a little bit for that day. Justin said all the time. You can continue to add in. And then also to understand motivation, that there is a really big role in dopamine and some of our neurotransmitters in their role in motivation. So, dopamine regulates a lot of our brain reward system, and low levels of dopamine can really can keep motivation down. So that's why we'll talk in some strategies, things that we can do that can help kind of speak to those neurotransmitters so we can kind of cycle up and build off of that. We have Mona said yes to fatigue. We have John that said, I experienced apathy after a pattern of hard work that unfortunately led to a failure and unexpected outcomes. It's a feeling of helplessness, the why try syndrome. I could understand that too. We have Joe that's asking about a medicine. I'm not allowed to read it, Joe. I'm so sorry. But it's so important to talk with your doctors about medications. And so I'm not going to be able to read the medication name just because I'm not even that familiar off the top of my head about it. So I do apologize for that. But so we need to like understand motivation. And so let's, I shared some barriers, feel a failure, lack of clear goals or purpose, or fatigue, chronic stress. We're going to move on to our next slide. I'm going to ask you, what are some barriers you experience with motivation? And I will get us started. Sometimes when something is too big, it's hard to get started for me. Like if it's a project related to work or just something really, really big, it might get hard, be hard to start. Also, fatigue is definitely a barrier sometimes. Rhonda said, my spasticity stops me from trying and exhaustion. So it's important to know kind of what your barriers are. And it's important to see that we all kind of have barriers. And John actually mentioned a pretty good barrier is that, like when you experience something and it didn't turn out good, then it's like, gosh, all the effort I put in and it didn't work out. Joe says, attention to my wife. So those are some barriers for him for motivation. You can explain that a little bit more, Joe, if you want to. Tina says, I've been diagnosed with a frozen shoulder recently, so I don't have all the motion in my right arm. My husband is having some issues after being diagnosed with bladder cancer since October, so I'm totally overwhelmed. So sometimes like life stress and just literally life and stress and everything can be a barrier to feeling motivated to do things. And I want to again normalize that you're not alone. Linda says fatigue. Hi, Linda. I'm so glad you made it. Linda says fatigue and procrastination are my biggest barriers. And Joe says, in reference to his wife, not talking to her as much, not giving her enough attention. So you can see how we all have some barriers to with our experience to motivation. So let's talk a little bit about strategies. We'll move on to our next slide. So here we're going to talk about strategies to address apathy and to boost motivation. And again, I want you to think of this as a recipe because this is not one size fits all. And it's about what works for you. When I was doing therapy, or as a full-time therapist, I used to bring up this book, and it was called The Four Tendencies. And I use this a lot with apathy and with people in general with goal setting. And the book is called The Four Tendencies, and the author is Gretchen Rubin. And it's not a clinical book. But what I found very fascinating about the book is that it talked about these four personality types and how often we would fall into one of them, and that would tell us a little bit about how we handled motivation. And I always like to work with people to uncover what their type potentially was, because that would tell them a little bit about themselves and how to work around that. So, for example, there was a style called the upholder. And in this type, the upholder met commitments and was able to do things and get motivated internally. They did not need outside motivation. They internally could do the things that they did, maybe by pattern, by just kind of what they did every day, and they were just motivated internally and were able to do things. Whereas on the other side, there was a pattern type called a obliger. And I'm an obliger, and and a lot of people fall in the obliger category. The obliger category was that I would have a hard time getting up in the morning and exercising, say at 5 o'clock, or actually we'll just say this. I'll have a hard time getting up in the morning because when I'm tired, so MS is a part of that. But also, I just don't like to get up in the morning very early. But the other day, my dog Charlie had to go to the vet he had to be there by 7:30. And because I have an obligation to Charlie, I got up super early. And that's why I can get up and not miss flights. That's why I can meet somebody to walk early in the morning. But left on my own, I would not quite do that. And so for me, that was a really important thing to realize that I was a obliger, because if I wanted to make some of my strategies work, I needed to make sure to put in some of that external accountability. So it's interesting when you learn your tendencies. So if you're ever interested in that book, it's called Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. There's two other tendencies that attach, but most people fall in the obliger category, or the upholder, and then there's a questioner or a rebel. And so I highly recommend that book. So we're going to talk a little bit about strategies. So the very first thing that for a strategy is we're going to talk about setting clear, achievable goals. So when our goals are clear, they're easier to work towards. So when you break tasks into smaller pieces, it helps to give you momentum. There was once this image, and I love this image. One day I'll try to find it and put it into the presentation. But it shows, and I want to stay on this slide, by the way. It shows like a person at the tippity top, and it's like success, and it looks like the person just kind of got there. But what you really see in the picture is all these little tiny steps that they took to get there. So when you're setting clear, achievable goals, you are what you're doing is that you're making things to break them down where it's a lot more realistic to achieve. There's a thing called a SMART goal, and at different points in the mental wellness chat, I've done big time segments on SMART goals. But I'll give you some examples of realistic goals instead. So if I wanted to read more, then I could say, instead of just saying, I want to read more, because that's so big, it's so vague, and it makes me hard to kind of know what to do. I could say, I will read 2 different books each month by different authors. So that gives me a clearer way to sort of reach that goal. So we'll move on to our next slide. So strategy 1 is setting clear, achievable goals. Now this one I think is magic. Routine and structure. So for apathy, there is no medication actually that can help apathy. There's medication that can help depression, but not apathy. The best thing for apathy is actually having a sense of routine. And this is very true for the Parkinson's population and for people living with MS and other chronic diseases. But having a routine takes out a lot of guesswork. And if you're having trouble with motivating, having trouble with getting started or doing, when you have a routine, that kind of leads you to do it just because that's the next thing to do. And so it can be very beneficial. And then when you get to doing those things, you feel a little bit better. So establishing consistent habits can help to reduce decision fatigue. You know, should I get up and exercise, or do I want to do that tomorrow? Or saying, you know, when I wake up, you know, depending on, you know, what time I wake up, I'll get up and I'll exercise. Or it's just making sure that you're scheduling your activities around kind of your values and your goals. Now, if you're dealing with a lot of depression, I think what can help is having a soft routine. A soft routine is where it's not like every hour of the day is taken up with a task, but it's get up and I brush my teeth. I will, you know, get up and take a shower. I'll make my bed. You know, like small things like that can be very helpful. A soft routine. But having routine and structure, a game changer. And including socialization in that routine. And I know for many of you, this is a part of your routine because every month I see you here on the Mental Wellness Chat, which makes me incredibly proud and happy. But this is a part of your monthly routine even. But having routine and structure can really help. So we'll move on to our next strategy. Connecting your task to a purpose. So reflecting on why your activity matters, what you're doing, and aligning your goals or you know, with your personal values or your long-term aspirations. So for this, sometimes just moving for me is helpful during the day because I work remote most of the time. So figuring in a 10-minute walk and then connecting that 10-minute walk to that it's actually movement that's really good for me physically, and that's actually good for my brain as well. And because of that, it's good for my mood, kind of just connecting a task to a purpose. I also love when we can connect a task to to things like socialization and or interaction with other people or connecting, and finding ways to if you have something that you're working on, remember how recently helping a friend with a estate sale that she was doing, but that it connected to helping, but it also connected to a level of connecting and socialization, which was nice too. So there was a bigger purpose as well. So just kind of connecting, why you're doing what you're doing. So again, if you choose to, you're cooking at home, kind of cooking a healthy meal, kind of focusing on, that's, why you're doing what you're doing, finding the value of what you're doing to help reinforce it. The next strategy is going to be small wins. Now, remember the staircase analogy that I gave you? Small wins do that. Like if you have a small win, you're more than likely to get a little dopamine burst from that. And so by acknowledging the small wins, you're acknowledging really the things that are a big deal. I think gratitude is like this too, that if we acknowledge the small gratitudes, then overall we feel more grateful. But when we see our smaller wins and see that what we can do, then we can tend to build from that and maybe do a little bit more the next time. So this may, this can relate to all aspects of your life, from and goals, even from wanting to increase exercise, to eating vegetables or water, or drinking enough water, to wanting to interact with more people, etc. Whatever it is that you're working on, finding the small wins and paying attention to them, writing them down, holding them, because those are your wins. And often we're always waiting for like the big things to happen, but it's really the small things that matter. So we'll move on to our next, which is external accountability. So this is the one that I was talking about as someone who would be sort of an obliger. So when I need to increase motivation as a strategy, I usually tell people what I'm going to do. Because if I share a goal with a friend or a mentor or someone who's important to me, it helps with accountability. And I'll talk about Joe, if you're willing to speak up, can I share what you said at the very first part of this chat? You can say yes or no, and no offense if not. But last month we were talking about something, and we set a goal, and he was able to meet that goal, which was really, really cool. And probably a big part of that is by being a part of this bigger group and kind of working on that actually, okay, he said I could share, that it helped make it more real. And so at the beginning of today's chat, Joe said, I've been writing 3 small things I did throughout the day. So you've been writing down, and that's incredible, and I'm super, super proud of you, and I hope you're proud of yourself. How has that changed a little bit for you? But I can definitely tell the external accountability helped, because from that he reported back. I remember saying report back, and he's reporting back about how it went. And so that's pretty cool. So sometimes having external accountability can help. Now, we don't want to mix that with pressure. We don't want to mix it with people that are going to bully you, or say, well, why are you not doing that? Or, you just want people on your side, on your team, that kind of know what you're doing. And sometimes if that feels good, the external accountability can help. So we'll move on to our next slide. Create an energizing environment. So for motivation that is in certain spaces in your house or your home, if you declutter that space, it reduces a mental overload. Now, some people are trying to think about the best way to say this. I have a really good friend, and he is super neat and tidy. And that's how he's motivated and can kind of be creative and work, etc., and focused. And his spouse is has a lot more stuff and things, and that's how she's really creative. So some people really thrive off of spaces that that have a lot of things in it. But for this, if you create an environment that is energizing for you, it could help with motivation. So, for example, if you reduce some of the space around you, declutter a little bit, that can kind of sometimes like give you a little bit less stress, because not always, but sometimes clutter can feel chaotic. And surrounding yourself with motivating people, and resources, and even so for example, the where I'm looking right now, but I'm facing a picture frame that says connect, energy, and create. Those are my 3 words for the year. So my space has things that kind of inspire me, but also that you make sure it's kind of tidy. You can kind of see my space is a little bit tidy, but where I can find some sense of motivation. And so working on your space, I want to ask you guys, I'm just going to ask real quick, how many of you right now feel like your space, your environment is like conducive to kind of helping you to feel motivated with things? And it's okay if it's the rest of my house doesn't look as neat as this room, by the way. So I don't want you to think it's perfect here. But sometimes we have rooms that we need to work on, and we realize that we like kind of clear up a space, or we have a home gym, and we cleared that out the other day, and that can kind of make it a little bit more motivating. Um, but it is, your spaces that you're in. If you're wanting to do like a person who is someone who I worked with that wanted to write, and he was an author, and he wanted to write more, and he was having a lot of trouble. And so we talked about having his things in front of him, very close by, because physically he wasn't able to move around from room to room like he previously was able to. So we talked about having things set up, and to where he could have an environment that kind of fostered some of that ability to kind of write and create. Mona says kind of, and Rhonda says working on to get there. So kind of thinking about the things that motivate you and what your environment is like, and is it helping to create that? So another strategy here is incorporating movement and physical exercise, or activity, not exercise. So we'll move slides. So when we incorporate movement and physical activity, what happens is that, again, those that dopamine that I'm talking about, the endorphins, you are helping to increase both of those neurotransmitters, and that is a spiral up. So that's going to improve your mood and your energy. Now, if you physically are not able to do something, I want you to find the things that you physically can do. It could be stretches, it could be chair yoga, it could be, for me, exercise and movement looks very different based on what my work world is like, what the temperature is outside, what a lot of different things actually are in the mix. And so even if you could think about like either short, walks, time outside, or even just stretching can really re-energize your mind. So just incorporating those things as strategies can really help with motivation. And Linda says, I have different stations. I can't keep up with my husband's stuff. So she has different areas in the house that are her stations, that are her things, and that's awesome. And not feeling responsible for everybody's spaces. So the next strategy we're going to talk about is practicing self-compassion. If you're dealing with apathy, or if you ever deal with apathy in the future, I hope that you can do it in a way that you're non-judgmental. You might be able to identify, I'm feeling kind of apathetic. I've realized that I'm not feeling connected to things that I want to do. I'm having a hard time getting started and motivated, and and I'm not feeling myself even. And your doctor can always work with you to define if it's apathy or depression. Um, but avoiding that self-criticism, that mean voice, and focus on, as you're, thinking of strategies, to think about the progress that you're making, the small things that you do, and not focusing on perfection. How we talk to ourselves really does matter. And when we're in a period of apathy and it's hard to get started, we usually don't do as much as we can do during other periods of time. I I am noted at my job. So I'm the director of patient education for a cancer organization, and recently I had said to my teammates, that sometimes I work slow and sometimes I work fast, but I'm incredibly kind to myself no matter if it's a day I'm working really fast or a day that I'm working kind of slow. That I'm kind to myself any day, because the days that I work really fast and I do a lot, I probably do more than I normally would do. And the days that I work slow, my quality of work is still, it's still good. I'm just working slower, and that's okay. But learning how we talk to ourselves, and what we say to ourselves really does matter. And then our next strategy is visualization techniques. So if you're having a hard time getting started with something, and having a hard time completing a task, imagine using guided imagery to kind of help you visualize what it will feel like to work on that, or what it would feel like to finish that goal. And remembering that how you feel once you get started often changes. So getting started is the hardest part. And once you get there, the other things start to kick in, like the dopamine or the your neurotransmitters, or and those things actually can help you feel better. And then once you get started, that it all interconnects. David said, "Yes, I have a place to exercise, breathe, and encourage." That is so great that you have that space. So we're going to move 2 more slides, and we're going to land on engage and play. So one more slide up. This is a strategy. When you're having a hard time getting motivated or working on something, I want you to think about something that has like more novelty or play to it. Trying a new hobby or something different, and this may make things more interesting for you, and this actually can help to incorporate more playful, low stakes tasks. Just the low hanging fruits to just kind of spark a little bit of energy. So what I normally recommend, and you can see in my background beside by the candles, is that I have markers and paintbrushes and things like that. I have things that I can play with even at my desk. I always say that I I preach what I talk, but I have some really good markers there. But I make sure that I have things that are sort of creative and that allow me to play a little bit. And because of that, that can help me when I'm feeling stuck, or something's feeling too big, or I'm having a hard time getting motivated. I might do something that's a little creative for just a little bit, and that can help kind of just to rewire my brain a little bit and let me get started. That's not a distraction. I will end the activity and move on to what I am doing. But that engaging in play is really good and really helpful for you. I think it's good to have visual reminders of things that are playful around you. So for me, it's art supplies. For other people, I've worked with people that like to sew, and they'll have their sewing machine out in front of them, or they like to play music, so they have their piano or a keyboard close by. Just making sure that you have things that you can play and that you engage in that, because if you do that, that will help you to as a strategy to feel a little bit better and to help motivate for other things. So we're going to go on to our next slide, and I'm going to ask you, what are some strategies that you think might work for you? So I mentioned that play works really good for me, and also having the external accountability works very, very well for me. But what works for you? I want you to think about it. Joe says you practice what you preach, and I really do for the most part, and it's a good reminder. You guys hold me also accountable. So I want to help you as well. So I do practice what I preach. So Linda says, sticking to my daily routine. So sticking to her routine is really helpful for her as a strategy. I know I went through a lot of different strategies, so I'm going to see. Sometimes, someone I know very well from work, they one of their strategies is when they're starting to feel kind of stuck, is they go for a short walk. This person doesn't have MS, but I've noticed that that kind of sparks like creativity, sparks the ability to go through and do the other things that she wants to do. Taking small breaks as I do things, that's what Helen said. That is like really, really helpful as well. Taking small breaks and breaking it up, that is awesome. Tina says, I have to fill out my daily plan, write everything down. I love that. So continue to contribute to that. We're going to move on to our next slide. But what strategies work for you? I want you to think about this because you know what will work for you and what won't work for you. But we have Rhonda said, communicating with others who set goals. It keeps me focused. Very good. Helen said adult coloring or sewing. Tina said filling out the daily plan, writing everything down. Renee said communicating with others who set goals. Rhonda says I write plans I want to work on and add to my routine. That is great. And Linda says I make a list for my week goals and check them off. That is great. Now I want to remind you for if you ever make goals and you don't meet them, that's happened to me before, and I'm sure it's happened to many of you as well. One of the things that I do is that I will do the I did list, and I've talked about this before in the mental wellness chat, and this is something I've encouraged for people to do, is to write down the other things that you're doing, because sometimes our goals change because like life changes them, work changes them, stress changes them, we like to stick to our goals because that's the ideal, but sometimes they get kind of like, we get kind of turned around in a different direction. And we often do other things that we don't give ourselves credit for. So if you ever find yourself in that spot, give yourself credit for the things that you are doing, the I did goals. And for that is, it can be a very like healthy mental reset. And then to get back on the other goals that you're working on instead of feeling like I just didn't meet my goals. So we're going to move on to our next slide, and we're going to talk about how do we sustain motivation when we find it. So a couple of techniques are, and so we'll move our slide. We're going to talk about tracking progress. You're going to want to use journals, apps, charts, or even anything to really document any growth that you're having. So that's one way. Also to reassess your goals. So adapt your goals and your circumstances as things evolve. Celebrate your wins, small and big. Please celebrate your wins. And then also for sustaining motivation, all of these areas, a therapist could be helpful for you. And so if you struggle with these areas, this is as I was able to really talk through these very easily because as a therapist, these are things that I've helped people with. And so a counselor or therapist can help you to find ways to help you with finding strategies and tools that might be able to help you with motivation. So if we can move to the slide that is titled Gratitude. Sorry, yeah, mindset approaches to common challenges. I did want to cover that one. So for mindset approaches, a couple of tricks here is that you can, if you're having trouble getting started, tell myself or tell yourself, just for 2 minutes. For this, I'm going to do this for 2 minutes. Often, when you get started, that is just one of the bigger challenges. Another thing that you can do is breaking things down, as we talked before. But allowing yourself ways to kind of look at things a little bit differently, and that can really help you with common challenges that you might experience. I have another note, and I'm trying to see if I can find it. Let's move on to our next slide, and I will find that other note. Okay, so we talked about sustaining motivation. So that there is, what we essentially do when we I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna find, because I know I had that document. I got like a slide mixed up where I had my notes. So for sustaining motivation, I think some other things, to be able to celebrate and to find your wins. What we're going to do is we're going to move on to our next slide, and I'm going to see if I can find that one slide here. So gratitude. It is the month of Thanksgiving, and and I know tomorrow you may or may not have plans, and if you do or don't, that is okay. My favorite Thanksgiving was with my family at Boston Market, and it was like just a very low key time. Is actually one of the lowest key holidays ever, and I loved it. But tomorrow, people usually, we tend to focus on like the big things that we're grateful for, the big gratitudes in the world. And I think that it's really, really important to make sure that we're celebrating the small little things that happen in the day, that make us happy, or make us smile. And so I just want to remind you, as we go into Thanksgiving tomorrow, there's a lot of big gratitudes, a lot of big great things that happen, but also every day we have small little things that happen that are good things, and let's notice it, because it's our job to notice it. So I'm going to talk real quick. I found my notes for that mindset approach to common challenges. So we'll stay here on gratitude, but it was that slide that I was missing the note. So when we're talking about, like how can we kind of create hacks to common challenges with motivation? So one is procrastination. So if you deal with procrastination, that you like to put things off, or you're just having trouble getting started, again, that 2-minute rule. I'll do the task for just 2 minutes. Getting started, often you'll continue it after, because you start to kind of you will impact some of those neurotransmitters, and so the dopamine, et cetera, and you'll feel more productive, and you'll continue on. Also, low energy. You remember we talked about often with chronic disease, fatigue, plays a big part of apathy, and so how can we deal with that with motivation? Really is prioritizing your rest, your hydration, and your nutrition, and in your self-talk. There is not. There's a lot we can do with fatigue in terms of being proactive, but sometimes fatigue is a part of our lives, and so taking care of yourself first, and then that will help you to be able to have energy when you can seize it to work on the things that you're working on. Going against negative self-talk, using positive affirmations, and reframing challenges as opportunities. And instead of having a focus on a fear of failure, focus on the effort and growth, the small things that you're doing, rather than the outcomes. So that kind of makes me feel like John mentioned something earlier about fear. I feel like focusing on effort and growth rather than outcomes. Okay, so we'll move on to our next slide. So again, I'm always going to say this, you are not alone, and I want you to know this. And together we are a great community, and it's important to always connect to people and stay engaged, but more than anything, to know that you're not alone in challenges that you have, either with your disease or even emotional, mental challenges. There's a lot of people that would understand what you're going through. And my hope is that we stay connected. Can we move forward to the next slide? So I'm going to thank Viatris for their support, because without them, we would not be able to have the mental wellness chat. And without that would be pretty sad, because this has been such a great program for many people. I want you to go in on the chat and let me know one small thing that happened today that you're grateful for. I think it's a great way to end tonight's program, to think about one small thing that that you are grateful for. And I will thank you, Summer. Summer said this program. I'm going to say that I am grateful for this cup of tea. And this program actually encouraged me to make it, because it just feels nice to share a cup of tea with you guys. And this type of tea that I'm drinking reminds me of my auntie, so that gave me a little bit of gratitude. Linda said, I made my son lunch and we dined together. Helen said, I received 2 Christmas presents for my son, from her sons. Carol said, I had my eyebrows done. Both of those are really good. Keep them coming. The small little things, like, I think that sometimes we, we focus too much on the big things, so the small little things. So if you know me, I'll say, I don't say goodbye. I say, I'll see you later. So I wish you a beautiful Thanksgiving, no matter what you're doing, and know that you are not alone, and I will see you next month.